It's now my pleasure to welcome today's keynote speaker, one of the nation's most respected political analysts. Michael Smerconish is exactly the sort of communicator I spoke about earlier, a person who deals in facts, in verification, and in intelligent, respectful discourse. He's the host of the eponymous CNN program Smerconish and the Michael Smerconish program on Sirius XM satellite radio. He writes a weekly column for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and somehow he's found time to write 6 books, 2 of which were New York Times bestsellers. He's a Bucks County native whose roots are in politics and the law. Before he became a broadcaster, he was a successful lawyer and a presidential appointee in the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. As a political commentator, he's known as a voice of moderation in an age of bombast. In fact, if you've seen his show, his theme music is the 70s hit song, Stuck in the Middle with You. He's appeared on programs across the political spectrum, from Real Time with Bill Maher, to the Colbert Report, to the O'Reilly Factor. We're so fortunate to have him with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Michael Smerconish.
Thank you, Dean Boardman. Tracy, that was tremendous. Thank you very much. It was really great. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm fortunate in my ability to do interesting things in my chosen profession. Last year, I was a CNN election night commentator with Anderson Cooper for 9 hours with 13 million people watching, which was a cable television record. Bill Cosby afforded me his only pretrial interview. George W. Bush called my radio program when there was just 1 hour left in the polls in the 2000 election. I wrote a novel about the talk radio world. My protagonist was a white classic rock DJ who becomes a conservative talk radio host. A Hollywood studio that bought the rights changed that character to a black hip-hop DJ. They attached comedian Cedric the Entertainer to play the lead role. What an experience for me to sit next to him at pitch meetings while he made the case to want to play on the big screen a character that I had created out of whole cloth. There was the time that I interviewed President Barack Obama live at the White House in what was his first live radio interview as president. He arrived early before the mics were hot, and I needed to make small talk with him. So as soon as he sat down, I said, "Mr. President, what's in that book of secrets?" And without missing a tick, he said to me, "I would tell you, but I would have to kill you." Afforded time, I would enjoy telling you about each of those and others. I think my stories would entertain, but they wouldn't enlighten. Instead, I'd rather share with you my disappointments. My radio work arose many years ago after I'd had unique political experiences at an early age. I was first a guest, and then a guest host, and then a Sunday night host of my own program, and then a Saturday morning host, and then a Saturday and Sunday morning host. I did 1 hour an afternoon drive, then 2 hours an afternoon drive, then 3 hours an afternoon drive, switched to mornings, had my program syndicated, and moved to Sirius XM. If you were to look at my radio career on a graph, it would tell a story of steady progression, but that would be misleading. I once hosted a morning radio program that did well in what was then the nation's 4th largest market here in Philadelphia. Bill O'Reilly was then the biggest name in cable television news. He too had a radio program. His was syndicated on 500 stations across the country. For 5 years, I was his principal fill-in. When he vacationed, I hosted his program. I thought I was paying my dues. I wanted a syndicated program of my own. But when O'Reilly decided to retire from radio, his syndicator, Westwood One, didn't hire me. They said that they wanted a name, And so they hired a former actor and United States Senator named Fred Thompson. You might remember his work in The Hunt for Red October. Other syndicators also took a pass on me. They told me that I was a capable national understudy, but that I lacked edge for what was then in demand. I was similarly stymied on television. After getting exposure on the local network affiliates here in Philadelphia, largely because of the generosity of a local media legend named Larry Kane, I was excited when MSNBC called and asked if I would fill in for one of their hosts, Joe Scarborough, who then had a 10 p.m. program called Scarborough Country. Just as with O'Reilly on radio, this became a regular gig. Scarborough missed many programs because he had a bad back, and so I got lots of work as his fill-in. I would host his program until 11 p.m. on weeknights in Secaucus, New Jersey, then sleep in the back of a town car en route to Philadelphia, get up at 3:30 and host my own morning radio program. Suddenly, Don Imus, the MSNBC morning man, was fired for an inappropriate comment. And quickly, they put me in Imus's seat. I was given a one-week tryout on live television. On the second day of that program, of that week, one of my guests was John Anderson, the lead singer of my favorite rock band growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Yes. And before I left the studio that day, there was an announcement that Steve Kappas was on the phone. Steve Kappas is a Temple graduate. He was then the president of NBC News. Excited that this might be the call, I reached for the phone. Oh, he doesn't want to speak to you, I was told. He wants to talk to John Anderson. It seems that Kappas, who also grew up in the Philly burbs, was equally a Yes fan. I didn't get that job. They gave the Imus show to Joe Scarborough, whose back must have healed. And worse, I didn't get the Scarborough time slot either. Soon came the 2008 presidential election. Now, MSNBC launched a program, daily show, that they called Race for the White House. They named David Gregory the host. I was a regular panelist. So too was an Air America radio personality named Rachel Maddow. Also, Jay Carney, then the Washington bureau chief for Time magazine. And we appeared together often. When the presidential campaign ended with President Obama's election, David Gregory was asked to host Meet the Press. Rachel Maddow was given a show of her own in prime time on MSNBC. Jay Carney was named the director of communications for Vice President Biden, on his way to becoming press secretary for the President of the United States. Me? I was the only one not to get a new job. And my two TV colleagues who did get shows of their own never had me on either of their programs. Instead, I continued to do fill-in work, often now for Chris Matthews on Hardball. And whenever Matthews vacationed, I was in his chair. Just as I had done for O'Reilly and for Scarborough, and soon for Glenn Beck on Headline News, I was the go-to fill-in. My ratings were strong. For 5 years, I guest hosted for Matthews. And of course, I really wanted a television show of my own. Finally, MSNBC offered to shoot a pilot. I had done a few of those for CNN that hadn't been picked up. What do you wish to call your proposed show? I was asked. I said, I like the title Politics Nation. MSNBC didn't like my pilot, but they liked my title. So they gave Al Sharpton a show of his own, and they named it the way I had cast. The president of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, used candor that I appreciated, even though his words stung. He said that while my work was respected by the network, I would never have a show of my own there. Smirk, he said, we are young, liberal, and nerdy, and you are none of the above. After local success but many national rejections, I gave serious consideration to returning to the practice of law. That I would be ever regarded as a dependable backup seemed obvious. The Nick Foles of broadcasting. Finally, 5 years ago, CNN was struggling. They hired Jeff Zucker to be the worldwide president. Zucker had previously been the executive producer of The Today Show when he was only 26 years old, a career path that would lead to his being president of NBC Universal and finally CNN. Well, 3 months after he landed at CNN, I met him briefly at a White House Correspondent Association dinner. We didn't exactly bump into one another. I went looking for him at a party so as to introduce myself. And Zucker invited me to contact him. I did so the following day by email, and then by phone, and then by overnight mail. Guess what? He didn't reply. So for 8 more months, I continued my radio and television work. The good news is that by now, my radio program had been syndicated, and I'd eventually moved to Sirius XM, where I continue on the POTUS channel. I was still at MSNBC guest hosting for Hardball for Chris Matthews, but having a TV show of my own eluded me. That winter, Chris Matthews vacationed near Christmas. I spent my holiday guest hosting his program. The positive ratings that I generated warranted a small blurb in a website that covers the television cable world. So I forwarded that mention to Jeff Zucker at CNN, and this time he replied. In fact, he invited me to meet with him the following day. How to get there became an issue. The Northeast was in the middle of an ice storm. Amtrak was operating at a reduced schedule. Our eldest son, who was then a senior in high school, drove a Jeep. The only way that I could get to New York City for the meeting was to drive his vehicle, only he hadn't screwed the roof on properly, and it had leaked and filled with ice. So I drove to the big meeting on the New Jersey Turnpike, slipping and sliding all the way to the Lincoln Tunnel. In my first real meeting with Zucker, we seemed to bond. He was no BS. There would be no pilot. In a conversation that didn't last 15 minutes, he offered me a program of my own. And when I retrieved the Jeep, the ice had melted. Soaked, I celebrated all the way back to Philadelphia. Today, I'm where I want to be. I'm hosting a daily radio program that bears my name. It's heard coast to coast on satellite radio. I have a weekend cable television program that's viewed internationally. My Sunday column, as the dean mentioned, in the Philadelphia Inquirer is routinely printed in newspapers across the country. I'm very proud that in the spring, Temple University Press will publish my 7th book, which is a collection of those columns. I'm pleased with those achievements. But I'm more proud of what went into them. Navigating the roadblocks and overcoming the rejection. Nothing's fallen into my lap. I know people to whom things have come effortlessly, and so do you. That's never been my experience. And you mustn't assume it will be yours, especially not in the professions that flow from earning a degree from the Klein College of Media and Communication. Chances are you won't be architects, engineers, or accountants. Those are professions with steady career progression. In a bygone era, you'd do 25 years and they'd give you a watch. But in our world, in the media world, it's one in which rejection is commonplace. The good news is that here at Temple, you've been afforded the tools for success. You're ready. But this is the final lesson. It's not grounded in any textbook. It was probably not the focus of any lecture. You must ask for the order. My climb has taught me that in order to succeed, having a skill set isn't enough. You're going to need to request the meeting, to write the email, better yet, to sign the letter, to make the phone call. Be prepared to introduce yourself, show up where you're not invited, and find a mentor. People love to be asked for advice. Your level of professional success will be determined by your unwillingness to accept rejection and failure. You're ready. Now do it. Thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Michael. And believe it or not, you were our first choice for speaker tonight.